Hey, why don't we go ahead and get started? So hello, everyone. Welcome to Ask the Grant Writing Expert. I'm Dr. Meg Bouvier. You know me as the creator of your library of NIH grantsmanship courses. I have over 35 years of experience at NIH as an applicant and ERTA fellow, a staff writer for Dr. Francis Collins, and since 2007, a full-time grant editor and advisor. And I have helped clients land over $500 million in federal funding, the vast majority from NIH. And I'm here to answer your NIH questions. So grab a cup of coffee and let's get started. So a reminder that if you are attending live, you are in listen-only mode. You can type your questions into the Q&A box, and I'll open that now so that I can monitor the questions coming in. And if you have a comment that you want to share with the group, it's not really a question, but just information that pertains to the topic we're discussing, feel free to put that in the chat box. If you're watching this as a recording, just a disclaimer that things change very quickly at NIH. So the date today is May 17th, 2023. And everything we discussed today is true at NIH today, to the best of my knowledge, but you should always double check the policies because things change very quickly there. So what you should be watching in the library right now, if you are applying for a June or July deadline, hopefully you're wrapping up feedback that you're getting from your mentors and advisors. And maybe you would be watching checklists to avoid top mistakes. Something like that might be useful. In terms of updates coming out of NIH, the federal government has ended this state of emergency concerning the pandemic. And with that, their policy about post-submission material, including preliminary data, ended. But they have replaced it with a policy, which is music to everybody's ears, which says that if you are applying for an R01 and R21 or an R03, you can submit preliminary data as post-submission material as long as the mechanism allows post-submission material. So that is going to be a permanent change to the post-submission material policy, which is great news for everybody. Okay, so I'm going to pause here. Feel free to start typing your questions in the Q&A box. And while people begin to type their questions, I'm just going to share some things that that happened this week that are always kind of, my professional development continues as well. So this week I heard for the first time of a notice of funding opportunity that requested a letter of intent where the program officer said that the application would be reviewed at a standing study section. So this is pretty unusual. So for those who don't know, often topic-specific NOFOs, or Notice of Funding Opportunity announcements, will ask for a letter of intent 30 days before the study section meets, or 30 days before the deadline, sorry. The letter of intent is not binding. And it's not required, but I always advise that people submit it. It's typically used by program staff to plan some sort of an ad hoc review panel. So even though the instructions don't ask for it, I typically suggest that applicants list the types of expertise that should be represented on the panel in order for you to get a fair and impartial review. It just seems like a good thing to add. The instructions don't ask for it, but it can't hurt to add it, given that that's typically what the letter of intent is used for. But as I said, a couple of days ago, I met with an applicant who I asked to double check with his program officer that it would be reviewed at some sort of an ad hoc committee, like a special emphasis panel. And indeed, the program officer said, no, it's going to a standing study section. Let's discuss which one you think is best. So that was the first time I've ever heard of that since 2007. So that was kind of an interesting turn of events. The other thing is that this applicant was not aware of the assignment request form. I'm still finding that many applicants don't know what the assignment request form is. This particular applicant asked me to review his cover letter, where he made a request for an institute and a study section. And I let him know that those requests have to go in the assignment request form now. That's a 2-page form that has data fields in it where you can make requests for several different institutes listed in order of preference, several different study sections listed in order of preference, and a text box that allows you to state what your rationale is for selecting that study section. And of course, anybody who's been attending these sessions knows that I'm a huge fan of people making a request for the study section rather than letting the Center for Scientific Review make that assignment for them. So anyway, so just make sure that you're using the assignment request form. So feel free, a bunch of people have just logged on. Feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box. I didn't actually prepare a tutorial today because I figured, given how close we were to the deadlines, that people would have tons of questions. So I'm kind of surprised that people don't. So I've written down other things that applicants have asked me this week. I'm still getting questions about what NOSIs are. So I'm just going to take a moment to talk about the difference between a NOFO and a NOSI. So a NOFO, Notice of Funding Opportunity Announcement, that acronym just changed. It used to be called an FOA, a Funding Opportunity Announcement. So a NOFO is simply a catch-all umbrella term for any type of funding opportunity announcement. That could be like a parent announcement, it could be an RFA, whatever it might be, some sort of a topic-specific PA. All of those fall under the umbrella term of NOFO. So when you apply for a grant application at NIH, you have to identify a specific NOFO. In addition, it is possible that your topic might fall under a category called a NOSI, a Notice of Special Interest. A NOSI doesn't replace the NOFO. You still have to list a NOFO, a very specific NOFO. A Notice of Special Interest is a category of, it's again an umbrella term. It's an area of special emphasis for either a given institute or a collection of institutes, and it could be for a single funding opportunity announcement or a group of them. So if your topic is relevant to an active NOSI, you might also list that on your aims page and in your significance section. But it does not replace the NOFO, just so you know. Those are two different things. Everybody has a NOFO. Some people will also have a NOSI. So hopefully that clears that up for people. I'm still getting a lot of questions about that. So again, some people have just logged on. Feel free to type your questions in the Q&A box. I'm a little shocked at how few questions people have. Maybe everybody's just kind of in a coma because they've been writing so much with the deadlines coming upon us. I'm still getting questions about the difference between the R21 and the R03. So I just want to point that one out as well. Those are both 2-year awards. Typically, they're seen as a pathway to the R01. The R21 is typically about 200,000 in directs capped over 2 years. And the R03 is 200,000 capped in directs over 2 years. And the R21 is a little bit more, usually about 275,000 in directs capped over 2 years. Those amounts can be different. I've seen them a little bit different when those mechanisms are sponsored by institutes. And in fact, nowadays, a lot of institutes don't participate in the parent announcements. They may sponsor their own specific R21s or R03s. So you should check to see what NOFOs are active for your specific institute. The R21 tends to be for research that is a little more outside of the box, a little more cutting edge. It might be a new area of research for you. But having said that, you still need to have preliminary data for an R21 typically. Unless the NOFO specifically says no preliminary data, typically you have to have some. An R03 tends to be a little bit more conservative, and in fact, sometimes it's for secondary data analysis as a standalone project, and doesn't lead to an R01. It might come after an R21. In addition, there are certain R03s and R21s that are open only to funded K applicants. So just to give you a sense of the landscape there for those two small format Rs. Okay, so I have a question. Can you talk more about the R15 mechanism? How much and who is eligible? It's a great question. So the R15, the acronym is AREA grants, A-R-E-A, and I'm not recalling offhand what the acronym stands for, but they are a special category of R mechanism that is only open to certain eligible entities. NIH used to have a parent R15, and they used to list applicants that were eligible, I believe, or they may have maintained a list of ineligible ones, I forget. Now the onus, as of a couple of years ago, the onus is on the applicant to determine their eligibility. And the eligibility has to do with I think the organization has to be eligible. So your entity has to have landed something like not more than $7 million over the last 4 of 7 years or something like that. I'd have to go back and look specifically at what the language is. And I've never really been able to get a very clear answer from program officers about what the entity is. So I have had people in well-funded organizations. So like you might say participate in a school of public health, and your school of public health is really well-funded as a whole, but your department is not. I have had applicants have program officers sign off on that and say, yes, while the School of Public Health is not R15 eligible, your department is. So that's something to ask the program officer about and just double check, because I know the person who is asking this question comes from a state university that as a whole is very well funded, but I can't remember what department you come from, and your department might be R15 eligible. So double check that with your program officer. So the thing about the R15 is that the funding lines are less competitive for people who work in a department that hasn't had a lot of federal funding. So if you are, for example, at an organization that has a teaching orientation, so you don't have a lot of course releases, your teaching load is very heavy. In addition, you don't, because there isn't a lot of federal funding, there aren't rich funds of indirects to pay for cores and technicians and equipment. So you're kind of on your own when it comes to conducting your research. So what NIH does to try to give people like that a leg up and get them into the research game is to create this R15 mechanism where the funding lines it's a little easier for people coming from that organization to be funded, because you're competing against people from similar sets of circumstances instead of like, top 3 medical centers in the US, where you're not going to be able to compete against those sorts of entities. So why is NIH interested in doing that? Why are they trying to diversify their funding pool? Well, one of the reasons is that one of the goals of the R15 is to expose undergraduates to biomedical research. Now, the important thing to understand about the R15 is that it's not a training mechanism. So you shouldn't have language in there about anything having to do with training programs for the undergraduates that you list. What you do want to do is expose them to careers in biomedical sciences. So you should be listing things, for example, like having them go to seminars and having them attend journal clubs and that kind of thing. I have a talk on R15s that I've given live. I've never put it in the library. I would be curious if any attendees would be interested in having an R15 course in the library, because I could take that out and dust it off and update it and record it for the library if that's something of interest. So feel free to email me what you think about that. So email Meg at bouviergrant.com and let me know if an R15 course would be of interest to you. Okay, so yes, this person is definitely saying they would like an R15 course. So I'm actually going to make a note of that, because that's something that's kind of been on the back of my mind for a while, but I wasn't really sure how many people who subscribed to the library actually were R15 eligible. So it's good for me to know, because I would not have thought that anyone at your organization was R15 eligible, Julie, and clearly they are. So let me make a note of that. And again, feel free to type questions in. 15 course. Okay, what other questions have I gotten? What's a SEP? Oh, wait, let's pause, because I've got a couple of other questions coming in from live attendees. Any tips and recommendations for DOD CDMRP? I don't have any, but I can tell you that my friend Emily Clemens is attending AGE on June 14th. So Emily Clemens, Clemens, is a recently retired program officer from I forget what they're called there, project directors or whatever they're called, who oversaw a portion of the CDMRP funding portfolio. So while I don't work in those mechanisms, I work exclusively at NIH. She knows a ton about that stuff. So come back on June 14th and ask Emily your questions about CDMRP, because there is nothing you can ask her that she is not going to know. So okay, and hold on, there's another in the chat. Okay, and yeah, my email, Jamie was kind enough to put my email in the chat. So if there are others who would like an R15 training course added to the virtual course library, let me know. And for that matter, if there's some topic you want me to cover on Ask the Grant Writing Expert that you'd like to see as like a mini tutorial, feel free to ask me, ask for that as well by emailing me. Okay, so another question, should all key personnel be providing a letter of support? It seems that their personal statement states what their contributions will be. So no, so mostly key personnel provide a biosketch. So letters of support tend to come from consultants. So there is some gray area here. And I mean, there are people who have their consultants do both. There are people who have their key personnel do both. But the general rule of thumb is that key personnel, by definition, are people who make significant intellectual contributions to your project. And they should be providing a biosketch and typically don't provide a letter of support. Conversely, a consultant tends to be somebody who provides a service. So maybe you're sending out samples to be processed somewhere else. So that's somebody who's providing some sort of a lab service, but not necessarily intellectual input into the design of the project. And in that instance, that person should provide a letter of support. And you might get letters of support from, community partners, people who might be on a community advisory board, that kind of thing. So that's the typical breakdown. There actually is a website at NIH that compares letter of support versus BioSketch, and and there's another one that spells out the roles, co-investigator, collaborator, and consultant. Oh, and this person is saying, unfortunately, the deadline for DOD grants is May 31st. Too bad Emily will be coming on June 14th. I'm so sorry about that. You could reach out to her. She has her own company, and she may be happy to answer questions. She's terrific. And because she is just starting her company, she probably, I shouldn't say this because I don't know, but my guess is that she could probably take a project on short notice, or might be willing to answer a question. So her name again is Emily, Emily Clemens, Clemens, Emily Clemens. And she does what I do, but I do it for NIH and she does it for CDMRP. So I would suggest reaching out to her. Okay, another question. I am no longer eligible for the K-99, but I was considering applying for K-22. Are there any specifics that come to mind when applying for this mechanism? Are there any other options to consider when wanting to gear up for a career transition? So the K-22 is different than the other types of Ks, and I'm sure you know this. It's not like the K-01, K-08, K-23. It's a little different. Really, though, I guess my question for you is how much ESI time do you have left? Because whenever people come to me and they say, well, I'm thinking of doing a K. My first question is always, how much ESI time do you have? Because it's probably, so NCI in particular has pretty abysmal funding lines for their Ks, particularly their K-08 right now. But I think the K-22 as well. Excuse me, I have a cold. So it's probably going to take you several tries to land it. And then if you're doing planning a 5-year K-22, you're not going to be eligible for a release in the 75% effort that you have to have on the K-22 until the beginning of year 4, which means that you can't apply for an R01 until the end of year 3. So if you're thinking of several K submissions and then at least 3 years on the K before you can apply for the R, I would say that if you have 5 years or less on your ESI status, maybe you don't want to apply for a K. Maybe you want to go right into the R series and maybe look at a small format R or foundation funding so that you can put in a competitive R01, because you want to make sure you have enough time to get at least 2 submissions of R01 submissions in while you still have your ESI status. So I know I went off on a tangent. Let me see. Are there any specifics that come to mind when applying for this mechanism? Read the FOA, the NOFO carefully, because it is a little bit different. This is one of those where I think you're that issue of the mentor letter versus a letter of support comes in. I think you have to have letters of support for that one. If I remember correctly, it's kind of an oddball among the K mechanisms. Are there any other options to consider when wanting to gear up for a career transition? There are 2. So if you're looking to move into a different area, I'm assuming that you're still ESI if you're looking at a K. So one option is the R21, which is a small format R, 2 years, typically capped at 275K in directs. Great for a transition into a new area. You're required to have less preliminary data than you would on an R01, and you're not locked up for 3 years not being able to apply for an R, which is an R01, which is one of the nice things about it. So if you have less ESI time, an R21 might be a good bet. The other one is the CATS R01, if you're gearing up for a career transition. So what a lot of people do, the CATS is an R01 type mechanism that is designed for early stage investigators. And you are not allowed to report preliminary data in the application. Zero. It's not allowed at all. Having said that, I think what most applicants are doing is maybe they have a little preliminary data and they don't report it in the CATS application. They put in their CATS, and during that 9-month period that they're awaiting the funding decision on the CATS, they gather more preliminary data, and then if and when they don't get funded on the CATS, because the funding lines are not very good, they flip the application either into an R01 with the preliminary data they've been gathering over the last 9 months, or they put it into an R21. So those are some of the options that you might consider if you're looking in for a change in career. What's the direct budget for the R15? Offhand, I'm not recalling. I want to say it's about 300,000 indirects, but I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to go back and look at that. Julie, if you look at my course, Choosing the Optimal Funding Mechanism, I do review the decision. I actually have a table that lists R01, R21, R03, R34, and R15, and it compares them. And I'm just blanking at the moment on what the R15 is. It's a couple 100,000 indirects, and I think it's 3 years, but I very rarely am hired to work on R15s. So I'd have to double check the mechanism. So, you could look and see, but you could watch that course too. Okay, we have a couple of minutes left, and it looks like the other ones are not questions, but just thank you. So you're welcome. I hope I'm answering your questions. I feel like I keep going off on tangents on the questions. How much effort can you apply for as a faculty member as an R15 realistically? That's a really good question. And I don't typically get involved in percent effort because that's tied to budget. And I don't work on budgets at all. So I would check with your pre-award support office to see if they have a recently funded R15. Your university is gigantic, so they may have one that's recently funded. Yeah, I'm not sure I would even hazard a guess on that, but I'm guessing that it's got to be lower than on a typical R01, because R15 applicants usually come from places that have a high, where the applicant has a high teaching load. So, they might be teaching a 4-4 load. So like, I don't think they're expecting them to do like 40%, like it's not like, and again, I don't want to commit to that, but wow, I'd be really surprised if that's what they asked for on an R15, given that so many of those applicants have their primary responsibility is teaching. So just double check the mechanism and see. So we're just about out of time, and I just want to look at the upcoming dates. So in 2 weeks, David Widmer will be joining me. Recall that David was on 2 weeks ago and presented a mini tutorial on interfacing with the program officer as you're preparing to write. David spent over 20 years as the Director of Research Development at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, and recently left to start his own company. I've worked with him for years and just think the world of him personally and professionally. So he'll be coming on May 31st to answer questions. He's got really deep knowledge about NIH, particularly NCI, obviously. And then, as we discussed on June 14th, so the session after that, our guest will be Emily Clemens, who is a somebody who recently, a program officer who recently left CDMRP, and she will be coming on doing a mini tutorial on overview of CDMRP funding opportunities. And as I said, the chat has my email address. So it's meg@bouviergrant.com. Feel free to email me and let me know if you would like to see a course in the virtual library on R15 or on any other topics. I've been thinking of doing one on how to write a biosketch. And if you have any other ideas for course topics, let me know. Or if you have ideas for topics for Ask the Grant Writing Expert, I'm happy to take those requests as well. Some of my most successful products have come from suggestions made by other people. So, when I see that Jamie also put Emily Clemens' name in the chat. So that's it for today. So I wish you the very best of luck in your NIH grant writing, and thank you so much for attending, and I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.